My name is Sarah Whitfield. I'm 25 years old, and my life changed the night I overheard a conversation I was never meant to hear. It was late, the farmhouse windows rattling from the wind, and I was heading upstairs with an old box of photo albums when their voices stopped me cold. My father's tone was sharp, my brother's laughter cruel, and then I heard it, words that shattered everything I believed about family. In that instant, I realized the home I thought I belonged to was never really mine at all. White right pointing backhand index. Before I share what happened next, tell me where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. It was a chilly October night, the kind that made the walls of our old farmhouse groan as if the beams themselves were sighing. I had been in the attic, searching through cardboard boxes filled with dusty keepsakes. My mother's handwriting was still on the labels. Christmas ornaments, baby clothes, Sarah's school projects. She'd been gone for years, but her touch lingered everywhere, soft and unspoken. I carried one of the boxes down the creaky wooden stairs, careful not to trip, when voices floated up from the living room below. At first, I wasn't really listening. Dad and Mark, my older brother, often stayed up late, drinking coffee and talking about farm work. But there was something in Dad's voice that froze me mid-step. It wasn't the usual tired grumble. It was sharper, edged with something I rarely heard from him. Calculation. I stopped on the landing, clutching the cardboard box against my chest, dust stinging my nose. I told myself I should keep walking, that eavesdropping was wrong. But the words that slipped through the floorboards made my feet root to the spot. "She's not cut out for this, Mark," Dad said flatly. "The farm belongs with you. Sarah's never had the grit for real work." For a second, I thought I misheard. My ears rang, my breath hitched. My brother chuckled, a low, knowing sound that sent a chill down my spine. "You're right," Mark agreed. "She's too soft. Always has been. Remember when Mom used to let her off chores because she didn't want to ruin her hands? She doesn't belong here." My chest tightened. Soft? Didn't belong? I wanted to shout down at them that I'd worked those fields, hauled buckets, stacked hay. Maybe not as much as Mark, but I had spent years breaking my back alongside them. Yet here they were, dismissing me as though I was some stranger who had drifted into their lives by accident. I pressed myself against the wall, heart pounding so loudly I worried they might hear it. The house smelled of wood smoke and old varnish, and suddenly that smell turned sour, as if betrayal itself had seeped into the boards. Dad's voice dropped lower, but I caught the words that mattered. "When I'm gone, this place will be yours. Your sister doesn't need to know about the papers. She'll figure out her own path." The box in my arms slipped slightly, and I had to grip it tighter to keep from dropping it. The papers. What papers? My mother's name flickered in my mind, her half of the farm, the legacy she always whispered about when we were alone in the kitchen late at night. "This land is in your blood, Sarah," she once told me. "Don't let anyone take it from you." And now, from the sound of it, that's exactly what Dad planned to do. Mark's laughter floated up again. "Good. She'll probably marry someone in town and be happy with a little house and a garden. Leave the real work to me." Heat rose up my neck. I wanted to storm down the stairs, slam the box on the table, and scream at them that they had no right to decide my future. But something inside me whispered to stay quiet, to listen, to gather every word, every detail. Because this wasn't just casual talk. This was plotting. The clock in the hall chimed midnight. I stood frozen, each chime like a hammer driving their words deeper into me. My arms ached from holding the box, but I didn't move. Then Dad said something that shattered the last of my denial. "We'll need to act before she asks questions. If she finds out what her mother put in writing, it could complicate things." Writing. My mother's handwriting. The note I once saw her tuck into the locked drawer of her desk. I hadn't thought much of it back then. Now, it felt like a key to everything. I leaned forward too far, and the floorboard beneath me groaned. My heart stopped. Silence filled the house for one endless moment. "You hear that?" Mark asked. "Probably just the wind," Dad muttered. I didn't wait for them to change their minds. I tiptoed the rest of the way upstairs, set the box gently on my bed, and sank to the floor. My hands trembled so badly that dust sprinkled onto my lap. My throat burned with the effort of holding back tears. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the old water stains above me twisting into shapes I couldn't bear to name. I thought of my mother, her laugh, her gentle way of smoothing my hair when I cried, her firm voice telling me, "Don't let them decide for you, Sarah." Had she known? Had she suspected this would happen one day? Every creak of the house felt like footsteps outside my door. I imagined Dad coming in, catching me awake, realizing I knew too much. But he didn't. Neither of them came. Instead, I lay there replaying their voices over and over in my head, every cruel laugh, every dismissive word, every plan to erase me. My chest ached with a mixture of grief and rage. Grief for the family I thought I had, rage for the betrayal I never saw coming. By dawn, my eyes were swollen from silent tears, but my mind was sharp with resolve. I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't ignore what I'd heard. They weren't just talking. They were planning. And if I didn't do something, I would lose not only the farm but the last piece of my mother's love. I sat up in bed, the pale morning light washing over the faded quilt she had sewn years ago. My fingers traced the worn stitches, and I whispered a promise to her memory. I won't let them take this from me. That night had changed everything. The farmhouse no longer felt like home. The walls I'd grown up within were now lined with secrets and betrayal. My father wasn't the man I thought he was, and my brother wasn't the brother I could trust. I had overheard the truth, and now, nothing would ever be the same. I couldn't sleep that night. My dad's words clung to me like thorns in my skin. Relax, we'll make your sister regret. The phrase echoed inside my head with every creak of the old farmhouse walls. Lying there in the dark, staring at the water-stained ceiling above my bed, I realized something had snapped between me and the people I'd trusted all my life. Whatever they were planning, it wasn't harmless. It was pointed. It was aimed at me. By morning, the house smelled of coffee and bacon like nothing had changed. My mom hummed in the kitchen, and my brother Mark clomped down the stairs, yawning like he hadn't plotted my downfall the night before. I watched him butter toast as if he were just any ordinary 22-year-old farm boy, not someone who'd been promised my ruin. I forced myself to smile, but inside, I was unraveling. That's when I knew. I needed proof. I couldn't live in that house second-guessing every word, wondering if I was paranoid. I had to know. The first step was small. I started by watching their habits more closely. Dad usually disappeared into the barn after breakfast, but lately, he lingered at the table with hushed conversations only Mark was allowed into. They'd stop when I entered, trading quick glances before pretending to discuss whether our cattle feed. Mom, on the other hand, grew quieter, her eyes darting away whenever I asked questions. It wasn't her silence that scared me, it was her compliance. She wasn't the driver, but she wasn't stopping the truck either. That evening, while they sat on the porch, I slipped into Dad's office. The room was cramped, filled with old filing cabinets and dusty trophies from county fairs. His ledger lay open on the desk. Dad never left it out, ever. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Numbers lined the columns, but something didn't add up. Payments were missing, or rather, they were shifted. Land lease money that should have been credited under our family account had been funneled into one under Mark's name. I blinked, staring harder. He wasn't just keeping track of crops. He was moving assets. My stomach dropped. I didn't have long before footsteps creaked down the hall. I shoved the ledger shut, slipped out, and barely made it to my room before Mark knocked on my door. "You seen Dad's blue cap?" he asked, casual as ever. I shook my head. Nope. But the way his eyes lingered, as though he was studying my face for cracks, made me wonder if he already knew I'd seen too much. That night, I grabbed my old spiral notebook and began piecing things together. If Dad was moving money, I needed to trace the why. Was the farm in trouble? Were they planning to cut me out entirely? Or was it something darker, revenge wrapped in financial ruin? I wrote down every strange glance, every half-finished sentence, every checkmark in that ledger I could remember. By the third day, I decided to dig deeper. Literally. Behind the barn was an old storm shelter where Dad kept boxes of records dating back to my grandfather. I hadn't been down there in years, not since I was a kid sneaking in to play with mice and ruster tools. The air was thick with dust, and the single light bulb flickered as I pulled down the first box. Inside were deeds, property transfers, agreements signed with shaky signatures. My grandfather's name stood proud on some, but others, more recent ones, had only Dad's bold scroll. And in the latest stack, there it was again, Mark's name. Not mine. Never mine. I sank onto the cold cement floor, clutching the papers. My chest felt hollow. The farm was supposed to be shared, at least in some way. My whole childhood had been spent mucking stalls, hauling feed, patching fences until my fingers blistered. I'd thought that sweat earned me a place here. But the truth written on those papers said otherwise. A sound above me jolted me upright. The trapdoor creaked, and I froze. Heavy boots stomped on the wooden planks. My father's voice called down. "You down there?" My throat tightened. "Yeah, just looking for old blankets," I stammered, shoving the deeds back into the box. The silence stretched too long before he finally muttered, "Don't be nosy," and the footsteps retreated. That warning lodged in me like a knife. I couldn't stop, though. If anything, that moment lit a fire under me. I needed allies, but there weren't many options. My Aunt Linda lived 2 towns over, a woman Dad barely tolerated. She was the only person who ever told me, quietly, that I deserved more than scraps. I drove there the next morning, papers stuffed in my backpack, praying she'd open the door. When she did, her eyes widened. "Good Lord, Sarah, you look pale as a ghost. What happened?" I spilled everything. Every word I'd overheard, every ledger entry, every property deed. Her jaw tightened, her hands gripping the table like she needed to steady herself. "They are trying to cut you out," she said firmly. "Your father's moving the farm to Mark. And if he said what you claim he did," she shook her head, "then they don't just want you gone. They want you broken." Her words hurt more because they rang true. Over the next week, I worked in silence, pretending everything was normal at home while secretly copying documents and taking photos with my phone. Every smile I forced felt like walking a tightrope over fire. Every time Dad called my name, my heart jumped into my throat. But the truth was no longer hidden. It was staring me in the face, demanding I act. And deep down, I knew I couldn't play dumb forever. The house felt smaller after what I'd uncovered, as though the walls themselves were listening. Every conversation at the dinner table was now a performance, every smile an act. I knew too much to sit comfortably anymore, but not enough to confront them head-on. Not yet. If I wanted any chance of standing on my own, I had to prepare, quietly, carefully, in ways they wouldn't notice. The first step was money. I didn't have much tucked away, only the savings from odd jobs I'd taken in town, babysitting for the Mitchell kids, bookkeeping for the hardware store on weekends, and the little I'd earned selling handmade crafts at the farmer's market. It wasn't much, but it was mine. One evening, while Dad was out in the field and Mom was folding laundry, I slipped into the old tin box where I kept it hidden. I counted every dollar twice, my hands shaking. $316. It felt like both everything and nothing at once. I couldn't rely on cash alone. The bank in town knew my father well, and I suspected if I withdrew more than a few bills, word would travel back to him before sundown. So I opened a second account, one under my name alone, using the excuse that I needed a place to cash my craft fair earnings. The teller didn't ask many questions. Still, my palms were sweaty the whole time, terrified someone would walk in and see me sitting there. When I left, the small plastic debit card in my pocket felt heavier than a stone. The next step was gathering information. Aunt Linda had warned me, if you confront them too soon, you'll be out the door before you can blink. That advice stuck. So I began to collect, quietly, like a crow hiding shiny objects. I photocopied the deeds I'd found, storing them in the bottom of my dresser drawer beneath folded sweaters I never wore. I took photos of Dad's ledger pages with my phone whenever I could sneak into his office. At night, I backed them up onto a flash drive I wore on a chain around my neck. To anyone else, it looked like a piece of costume jewelry. To me, it was survival. But it wasn't just documents I needed. It was a plan. Where would I go if things fell apart? The thought alone made my chest ache. This farm was all I had ever known. My childhood was stitched into every inch of the land, the tire swing on the oak tree, the smell of rain on freshly tilled soil, the long summers when fireflies lit up the back pasture. Walking away from it felt like tearing out a piece of myself. But clinging to it while they plotted against me was even worse. So I started testing small escapes. I drove into town more often, using errands as excuses. I lingered at the library, reading quietly in the corner, pretending to study but really observing. I checked bulletin boards for job postings. Dishwasher needed. Store clerk wanted. Most paid little, but even the smallest chance meant independence. I also studied the bus schedule taped near the post office. I memorized routes, times, even costs, committing them to memory as though they were lifelines. The farm itself began to feel hostile, though nothing outward had changed. Dad still barked orders about feed runs and repairs. Mark still strutted around like the barn was his kingdom. Mom still cooked dinner, setting plates in front of us with mechanical precision. But I noticed the undercurrents now, the hushed conversations that died when I entered, the paperwork quickly folded away, the looks that passed between my father and brother. One evening, as I carried water buckets to the troughs, I caught Mark leaning against the fence, watching me with a smirk. "You're working hard lately," he said, almost mocking. I kept my eyes on the bucket. "Same as always." He chuckled. "Well, don't work yourself out of a place. Would be a shame if all that effort didn't count for much." The word stung, but I didn't let him see it. I simply nodded and walked past, my boots crunching against gravel. Inside, though, I burned. His smugness confirmed what I already knew. He believed he'd already won. To steady myself, I turned to small rituals. Each morning before anyone else was awake, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of weak coffee and write in my notebook. I didn't just record evidence now. I wrote down feelings, fears, tiny victories. Some pages were messy, angry scrolls. Others neat lists of things I needed to do. Gather cash, check the bus route, talk to Linda again. It became my compass, the one place I could be honest without fear of judgment. But preparation wasn't only about paper and money. It was about people. Quietly, I started to test who in town I could trust. At the diner, I lingered in conversations with the waitress, a kind woman named Mabel who'd known me since I was small. She never pried, but she listened well. At the hardware store, I asked a few too many questions about shifts, pay schedules, and hours, pretending it was idle curiosity. Nobody knew the whole picture, but I began to map out a safety net in my head. One night, as rain pounded on the farmhouse roof, I sat awake, staring at the ceiling. My chest was tight with fear, but there was something else there too. Resolve. Quiet, steady resolve. They might strip the farm from me, but they couldn't strip my will. Every small step I took, every dollar saved, every document copied, every bus schedule memorized, was a piece of armor. The preparations were silent, yes, but in that silence, I was building something stronger than they realized. And though I didn't know exactly when the storm would break, I knew this much. When it did, I wouldn't be caught unprepared. The storm began, not with thunder, but with voices. It was late afternoon when I heard them, my father's low growl and Mark's sharper tone, leaking through the thin walls of the farmhouse. I was in my room, notebook open, pretending to write. The pen froze in my hand when Mark said my name. "She's been snooping again," he spat. "You think I don't notice? Always hanging around your desk, always gone longer than she should be." She knows more than she's letting on. My stomach twisted. Dad's reply was colder, steadier. Then we'll deal with her. The words dropped like stones into my chest. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. With me. Not talk, not explain. Deal. I gripped the pen so tight it nearly snapped in my hand. I should have stayed hidden. I should have waited until their voices faded. But something inside me broke free. My legs carried me down the hall before I even realized what I was doing. The kitchen door creaked as I pushed it open. They both turned. Mark leaned back against the counter, smugness curling at the corner of his mouth. My father didn't move, but his eyes narrowed, sharp and assessing, the way he looked at a weak fence post he was ready to tear down. "You're talking about me," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Eavesdropping now, are we?" Mark sneered. Guess the guilt finally got too heavy. "Enough," Dad said, but he didn't take his eyes off me. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "I'm not guilty of anything. I just want the truth." A silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. The rain had started outside, tapping against the window in uneven rhythms. Finally, Dad spoke. "You think you're owed answers, girl? You think you can demand things in this house? Everything here exists because of me. Every acre, every fence post, every dollar. Don't mistake breathing under my roof as entitlement." His words hit harder than I expected, but the fear that had kept me silent for so long had cracked, and there was no mending it. "I've seen the papers," I said, my voice shaking now. "I know about the land, about the deals, about how you've been planning to cut me out." Mark laughed, low and cruel. "Finally figured it out, huh? Took you long enough." I turned on him. "And you, standing there, waiting to take what isn't yours, acting like you've earned anything. You don't even." "Don't talk to him like that," Dad snapped, slamming his hand against the table. The sound rattled through the room. "You don't have the faintest idea what you're saying." "Yes, I do." My throat burned, but the words kept coming. "I've worked here. I've bled here. I've put in just as much as anyone, and you'd rather hand everything over to him because— What? Because I'm not enough? Because I don't fit whatever mold you dreamed up." For the first time, I saw something flicker across my father's face. Not guilt, not regret, just weariness, like a man tired of carrying a weight he never wanted. "You were never meant to carry this place," he said flatly. "You're too soft, too stubborn. This farm would eat you alive." The words sliced deeper than any insult Mark could have thrown. The air in the room shifted. The storm outside swelled, rain hammering the roof, wind rattling the windows. My chest rose and fell too fast, my hands trembling at my sides. Mark smirked. "Guess that settles it." But it didn't. Not for me. Something hot surged through me. Anger, sharper than fear, sharper than pain. "No," I said, stepping forward. "It doesn't settle anything. You can tell yourself I'm not strong enough, that I don't belong. But I know what you've done. I've seen the ledgers. I know the debts, the missing money, the deals made behind closed doors." Mark's smile faltered. Dad's jaw clenched. "You've been covering for him," I continued, pointing at Mark. "And for what? So he can run this place into the ground while you pretend it's still yours. Is that your legacy?" The words were out before I could stop them, and the silence that followed was deafening. Even the storm seemed to pause, as though the world was holding its breath. Then Dad moved. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed the room and stood inches from me. His face was close enough that I could see the lines etched deep into his skin, the years of work, the bitterness carved there. "You don't speak to me like that," he said, voice low and dangerous. "You don't come into my house and throw accusations like stones. You think you're clever, gathering scraps of paper, listening through walls. But you're nothing without me. Nothing." Something inside me hardened then. Maybe it was the years of silence, the years of swallowing every sharp word, every dismissal. Maybe it was the knowledge that no matter what I did, I'd never be enough for him. Whatever it was, I didn't flinch this time. I'd rather be nothing on my own than everything under your shadow, I said. His eyes blazed, but for once, he had no words. The storm outside broke fully then, thunder cracking so loud the dishes in the cupboard rattled. The farmhouse groaned against the wind. Mark shifted uneasily, his smugness cracking around the edges. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for my father to speak, to strike, to end it all with one final blow. But he didn't. He just stayed at me, something unreadable flickering in his gaze. Then, with a sound like a growl, he turned and walked out, the screen door slamming behind him. The silence he left behind was worse than his anger. Mark let out a shaky laugh, though it didn't reach his eyes. You've done it now. I didn't answer. My hands were still trembling, but not from fear anymore. From release. From the knowledge that the storm had broken, and there was no going back. That night, I lay in bed listening to the rain batter the farmhouse. Every creak of the floorboards, every slam of the wind against the shutters made my chest tighten. But beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, something else stayed, something steady. I had spoken. I had stood my ground. And though the storm had broken, though it had left the house trembling, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I was still standing. Morning came grey and heavy, the air still damp from last night's storm. The farmhouse smelled faintly of wet earth and burnt coffee, but it was the silence that struck me first. No heavy boots across the floorboards. No doors slamming. Just the steady ticking of the clock in the kitchen and the occasional creak of the house settling. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the small duffel bag I'd packed weeks ago. It wasn't much. Some clothes, a few books, the copies of the documents I had pulled from the county office. But it was mine. My hand hovered over the zipper. Leaving would mean stepping into uncertainty. Staying would mean slowly drowning. The choice had already been made the moment I told him I'd rather be nothing on my own than everything under his shadow. I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked down the hall. Each step felt like it echoed, even though the house stayed silent. The kitchen light flickered as I entered. Mark sat at the table, a mug in his hands. His smirk was gone. Instead, he looked tired, almost hollow. His eyes darted up when he saw me. You really think you can walk away? He asked, his voice hoarse. I'm not thinking, I said, brushing past him toward the door. I'm doing. He let out a bitter laugh. You won't last a week out there. You've built your whole life on this place, on him. Without it, you're nothing. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. The old me would have frozen, swallowed the words, let them bury me. But not now. Then I'll learn how to be something else, I said quietly. I didn't wait for his reply. The screen door creaked, then slammed shut behind me. Outside, the land stretched wide and raw, washed clean by the storm. The fields glistened with dew, rows of corn bending under the weight of water. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of rain-soaked soil and diesel from the trucks parked by the barn. 4 years, this place had felt like a cage. Today, it looked like the starting line. I walked down the gravel drive, each crunch of stone under my boots grounding me. At the end of the lane, the old mailbox leaned crookedly, its paint peeling, the numbers barely visible. I rested my hand on it, realizing I might never touch it again. A car horn broke the stillness. I turned to see Jenny, my childhood friend, pulling up in her beat-up sedan, her hair tied back in a messy bun. She rolled down the window, concern etched across her face. You okay? She asked. I hesitated. Then I nodded. I'm leaving. Her eyes widened, then softened. Get in. The interior of her car smelled like vanilla air freshener and old French fries. I sank into the seat, my bag on my lap. Jenny drove in silence for a few minutes, the tires humming over the wet asphalt. Finally, she glanced at me. So, this is it? Yeah. My voice cracked, but I cleared it quickly. I can't stay there anymore. She tapped her fingers against the steering wheel. Do you have a plan? I let out a shaky laugh. Not really. Just, I know I can't keep living like that. She gave me a small smile. That's a start. We stopped at the diner on the edge of town. The neon sign buzzed faintly. Half the letters burned out, but the smell of frying bacon and fresh biscuits wrapped around us as we walked in. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until the plate hit the table. Every bite tasted like freedom, like something solid after weeks of uncertainty. Jenny leaned across the booth. You know, I could ask around. My cousin manages a hardware store in the city. He's always looking for reliable help. It's not glamorous, but it's a paycheck. I swallowed, the offer sitting heavy in my chest. Maybe, for now, I just need to figure out who I am without all of that. She nodded like she understood. Later, when she dropped me at the bus station, the sky had cleared. The sun broke through the clouds, warming the cracked pavement. I stood there with my bag slung over my shoulder, the rumble of engines and the chatter of travelers buzzing around me. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I felt like the world was stretching open, waiting. I bought a ticket to the city, no destination beyond that, no roadmap carved in stone. The woman at the counter handed it to me without fanfare, just another transaction in her day. But to me, it was everything. As I boarded the bus, I caught my reflection in the scratched window. My hair was messy, my clothes wrinkled, but my eyes looked alive. The bus roared onto the highway, fields rolling by in a blur. I pressed my forehead to the glass, letting the vibrations sink into me. For once, I wasn't thinking about what he would say, what Mark would sneer, what anyone expected. I was thinking about the road ahead. Fear still lived in my chest, sure, but alongside it was something new, something steadier, hope. And as the miles stretched between me and the farmhouse, I realized I wasn't just leaving a place. I was walking into my own future, one step, one choice at a time.